tonight we have Matt Payne. Matt, I've been following for a while on his podcast, F-Stop, Collaborate and Listen. If you've never listened to it, I would encourage you to. You just went over, what was it, 200 episodes, Matt? Something like that?
Yeah, I think today was 208.
Yeah, so he's been doing it a while. It's a great podcast. And actually, 2 guests ago, he just tuned me on to another one. Young woman, the outdoor photography podcast. So that's a really good find on that as well. And through following Matt on his podcast and his website and social media, I know that he's climbed all the 100 tallest mountains in Colorado. And I'll let him explain how that led him into landscape photography. But this last year, I know Matt, and if people recall, Kane Engelbert, did a judging of our group it was January 2020. Kane came in and judged. They've gotten into using UAS for landscape photography. So it's a whole different genre that's kind of coming out, or a paradigm shift in some of the landscape. And I thought it would be interesting to have Matt come on, talk about not only just a different perspective. And, for those of you who know my background and Dave Hall's background, we're both in the geospatial industry. So we've looked at aerial photography till we're blue in the face. To see people doing this now with UAS and seeing the landscape as I've seen it for 25, 30 years now, it's really cool. There's some really cool formations. And so I wanted Matt to talk about that. Some of the things that also go along with flying a UAS, rules, regulations, and so forth. Before I steal too much of his thunder, I wanted to turn it over to Matt Payne. If you haven't done so already, please mute your microphone. And Matt is open to, if you have a question during the during the program, to just go ahead and press your space bar and blurt out your question. With that, Matt, over to you.
Thanks, Sean. I appreciate that, and I appreciate being invited to present to all you fine folks tonight. I love that you mentioned my friend Kane, because Kane is the one that actually got me into drone photography and actually has been a huge inspiration of mine. I actually got into photography as a kind of a side thing to document my mountain climbs. So back in 2008, I decided to climb the highest 100 mountains in Colorado. And I started bringing a camera with me on those journeys, and just when I'd get home, I would do a trip report and a blog, basically. And it just kind of took over, and photography almost became more of an obsession than the mountain climbing. And, after about 2 years, I decided to check out every book in the library I could find on photography, bought myself a Nikon D7000, and I just went from there. So I got really obsessed with night photography for a long time. And my ultimate passion is, climbing mountains and photographing scenes from the tops of them at sunrise and sunset, which is a whole other topic of conversation. But the cool thing about drone photography is that it kind of simulates that experience a little bit. And I will say that, before I dive into my presentation, I will say that I kind of have a love-hate relationship with drones. I'd say up until I actually used one myself, I was very negative on drones. Every time I saw one, I was grumpy and upset that how dare they, fly that drone up there and get a perspective that I can't get with my legs, and they're disrupting my experience. And so we'll talk a little bit about how I try to mitigate some of those things. But there's some there's some pros and cons to drone photography that we'll talk about. So let's go ahead and just dive into my presentation. I will say that while I'm presenting, I probably won't be able to see you. So if you do have something, feel free to just say, hey Matt, can you hold up a second? And I'll pause what I'm saying. And I will also say, you can probably tell I like to talk fast sometimes. So if I'm going a little bit too fast, just just let me know or have me repeat something. So I will not be offended whatsoever. I get really excited. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. All right. Okay. And are you guys able to see the presentation still?
Yes.
All right, cool.
Yes.
All right, awesome. Sweet. So as Sean said, I'm a landscape and nature photographer in Durango, Colorado. And I like this title of this presentation, The World is Your Canvas, because I will tell you what, once you get a drone up in the air and you start to see the different perspectives that are available to you, your mind is going to be blown as to what possibilities exist. They're pretty much endless. So it's amazing. All right. So we got this little fun video I took with my camera this past summer. So, you know, this is my drone. This is the Mavic Air 2. It's kind of a mid-zone prosumer camera or drone. I like it because it's really lightweight. It's small, and compared to a lot of other drones, it's relatively quiet as well. So yeah. And there you go. It's taken off. All right. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to talk about how to get started and some things you probably want to know before you go out and spend your hard-earned money. We're going to talk about regulations relating to aerial photography, and they are numerous and ever expanding every day. We're going to talk about the experience of operating a drone. We're going to talk about how drone photography differs from ground-based photography. We're going to talk about some technical information relating to operating a drone and keeping your batteries charged. We're going to talk about some creative opportunities with drone photography. We're going to talk a little bit about video and drones. And then, of course, we'll have plenty of opportunity for you guys to ask some questions. So, all right. So in most of the slides I have, these are actual images that I've captured with my drone over the last year. And so my journey in drone photography started last July. So I haven't even been doing it for a full year. But as soon as I started, I've been trying to do it as much as I possibly can. So the first thing I would like to say is that it's not as expensive as you might think. You know, you can pick up a fairly capable Mavic Mini 2 with extra batteries for $600. You know, that's pretty good for a flying camera, if you ask me. The drone that I use is the Mavic Air 2. You can get that with, I believe, 3 extra batteries and extra propellers, and under $1,000. So boom, you've got pretty much everything you need to get started for less than it costs for a new lens. Kind of the best value, I would say, is the Mavic Air 2, but probably the best quality right now on the market is the Mavic Pro 2. And it comes in 2 different varieties. It has a static one that's got a fixed 24 millimeter lens, and it's got one that's got I believe it's a 24 to 52 millimeter lens, or 24 to 48. The sensors are not quite as good as a DSLR, but I got to tell you, I'm actually pretty impressed with how far you can push the files on some of these drones. So, and I was really surprised by the Air 2, how malleable the files are with it as well. You know, obviously this photo I took right here, this was in low light after sunset. You can see the belt of Venus on the horizon, and still pretty good signal to noise ratio, pretty good details in the shadows. So yeah, it's awesome. Some other things you're going to want to think about before you buy is the transmission. And what I mean by the transmission, it's not like your car transmission. It's actually the system that the drone uses to communicate between the drone and your controller, which for me on the Air 2 is actually my phone. It's my cell phone is the controller. And it says the screen of the controller. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. You're going to want to look for OcuSync 2.0, and then Mavic is coming out with OcuSync 3.0, or I believe they're shortening it to OS 3. But basically, the better transmission system you have, the less opportunities you're going to have for your drone to lose signal and fly away, or you lose your drone. So I will say one thing I was also very surprised about with the Air 2 and above is they're pretty foolproof in terms of, you losing them. It's pretty hard to lose your drone unless you intentionally crash it, or if you're just not paying attention. If it loses signal, it knows exactly where the GPS coordinates are or where you took off from, and it'll just return and land right where it took off from. So they're pretty impressive little guys. Um, Another thing you want to be thoughtful about is the battery life of the drone. I'd say if you're going to look for something that's about 30 minutes or better, I think there are a few drones on the market that are like 40 to 42 minutes, but they're pretty expensive and they're pretty big drones too. So 30 minutes is kind of enough, I think. You're also going to want to kind of think about the user experience, and we'll talk a little bit more about what I mean by that a little bit later. You're going to look at some of the various safety features. And by safety features, mostly what I'm talking about is obstacle avoidance. For example, my drone, the Air 2, has fewer sensors and fewer opportunities for obstacle avoidance. So like if you're using a video mode where it automatically is going in circles or something like that, it is not going to avoid obstacles. So you have to pay a little bit closer attention. Um, and then obviously, just like any other camera, you're going to want to learn about what the sensors are capable of and what video features the drone has, and see what your use case is. So for me, I got my drone primarily to do stills, but also for videos for YouTube vlogs and things like that. So my drone can do 4K 60p video, which is really awesome. And it's a pretty awesome little video camera that can fly around. And then a great place to start to kind of learn your drone or learn about different drones, or to like if you buy a drone and you want to really learn about every single thing that drone can and can't do, go to the Pilot Institute's website. They have free classes that you can sign up for that are kind of on demand trainings for every model of drone that's out there. So that's really cool. And I'm going to pause because I think there might be a question or two. So
Hey,
anything?
Matt.
Yeah.
Hey, Matt, this is Sean. You know, you say your Mavic is rated for about 30 minutes. Realistically, with wind and stuff, what do you think you average? About 20, 25, before you really got to pull it back in?
Yeah, so I am definitely not yet a proud member of the 1% club, which means you land your drone with 1% battery. So battery is really the thing you want to be really cognizant of, and a great point on the wind. So, if it's super windy, your drone is going to chew up a lot more battery life. And so it's just really important to pay attention to the kind of how much time is left. What's great is that the drones kind of have algorithms in them that will tell you based on the wind speeds and stuff how much battery life you have left. And you'll see, like, if you're just hovering out somewhere, your battery life's going to be longer than if you're actually actively flying it around. So it really depends on what you're doing with the drone. And we'll talk a little bit more later about the different modes, but most drones have a tripod mode, which is kind of a slower mode. It has a normal mode, and then it has a sport mode, which it goes a lot faster. It's more maneuverable, but it chews up battery a lot faster. So, I like to use that feature if like I just took my drone off and the light's changing really quickly, I'll throw it into sport mode. But most of the time I'm flying in normal. But yeah, that's a great question. I'd say, conservatively, you're probably 20, 25 minutes. I get super nervous if my drone is under 15% battery. So yeah, good question.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. All right, so what else should you know about drones? So before you buy, just know that it's a heavily regulated space to be in, and rightfully so, right? We don't want people flying their drones into buildings or into other aircraft or into people's faces or into cars, things like that. We don't want them flying into wildlife. There's a lot of reasons why drones are heavily regulated. And so you might have an idea right now. Oh man, I really wish I could, fly my drone over the Broncos game. You might not be able to legally do that. So it's important to really fully understand the regulations before you get into this. And I will say that it is a totally different experience than ground-based tripod or not tripod photography. I honestly thought I wasn't going to like it just because you're not operating the camera. You're not physically able to see what the drone sees, right? With your own eyes. But for me, I actually kind of got over that pretty quickly, and we'll talk more about that. It opens up a ton of doors and opportunities for creativity and content creation. I mean, really, the sky is the ceiling is endless in terms of what you can do with drones. It's pretty incredible. Um, they are pretty loud. I don't know if you've never been around a drone before, especially like the Phantom 4, some of the older drones, even the Mavic 2 Pro. They're pretty loud, and they can be disruptive for other people that are around. They can be disruptive to wildlife. So be mindful of that. And man, I got to tell you this, it is incredibly nerve-wracking, especially the first probably 4 or 5 flights. You are so worried that you're going to crash your drone into something, that you're going to kill somebody, that you're going to wreck it, and you're out $1,000. I mean, it is super nerve-wracking. So just be aware of that as well. Um, was there another question? No? Okay, cool.
Matt, I do have a question.
Yeah, totally.
Saws. The drone, how does it handle wind? Does it
Great
does it
question.
automatically stay in the same position and
Yeah, so
compensate?
it's going to depend on the model of the drone, right? So that's another thing to be really mindful of when you're reading reviews is how can it handle wind? I will say that I've never had any problems with my drone, and I've flown my drone in 30, 40 mile an hour wind, but I wouldn't advise you to do that. Basically, the way they handle wind is by applying different amounts of power to the 4 different propellers. So if there's a crosswind coming this way, the drone senses it and it allocates more power to the other propellers to keep it in the same position. But you will notice if you're trying to do like a slightly longer exposure and it's windy, you will get a little bit of blur in your image just because the drone is getting pushed around and things like that. And you will notice if it's really windy and you're flying it, I mean, you'll see it kind of flying sideways almost because it's fighting against that crosswind. So it is really important to pay attention to wind. I pretty much avoid flying in any wind that's over maybe 10, 15 miles an hour just because it's not a fun experience for the drone and it's harder to have a good flight. But yeah, great question. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you. And the vibration from the propellers, does that require a certain minimum shutter speed?
Man, you would think so, right? But I've been able, in calm conditions, in low light, I've been able to take, 2, 3, 4 second exposures, no problem. It's pretty incredible how stable the gimbals are on these drones. I mean, when you're flying it and if you're jerking it around on the controller, you'll see the image is very clean, very steady. So they've done an amazing job with the gimbals and the stabilization of them.
Yeah, that's impressive. Thank you.
Yeah, I was blown away, to be honest.
Matt, really quick, this is Philip.
Yeah.
Do the drones actually measure like the wind speed up at altitude, or do you need to know that going in?
So interestingly, I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to remember if it shows you the actual wind speed or not. I don't think it does, but it will give you a high wind warning if it's kind of above a certain threshold. And that's kind of to tell you like it's probably not safe to be flying in this amount of wind. Yeah, I don't think it tells you the actual wind speed, but it knows that it's windy. Yeah. And you can usually tell, right? But yeah, it will give you a warning, so that's good. Cool. All right, let's talk about some other regulations. So aircraft are regulated by the FAA. So they're not regulated by the Forest Service. They're not regulated by the National Park Service. They're not regulated by the BLM. They're regulated or cities. I mean, really, it's the FAA. Now, some jurisdictions will have abilities to, if they have their own rules and they find you violating those rules, they will confiscate your drone, such as national parks. We'll talk about that. But it's the airspace is regulated by the FAA, so it's really important to know what the rules and regulations are for flying drones in airspace. So I will say that the rules are complex, but not overly complex. And we'll talk about some of the, the big rules that you really need to be mindful of and pay attention to. Um, all of drone flight rules are governed under this thing called Part 107. And in the Part 107 regulations, it talks about the need for licensure to use your drone for professional use. However, I will say that there's kind of a misunderstanding in the drone community about what professional use means. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're making money. It really, the definition is a little bit more esoteric than that. I would say basically if you're, doing it as part of like a official film shoot, or if you have hired clients that you're doing it for, like for a real estate shoot, things like that, you're going to want licensure. There was a pretty interesting FAA case last year where a YouTuber got fined by the FAA for $10,000. And it wasn't because he was making money on his videos, but it was because of the way that he was advertising other things through his YouTube channel with the use of the drone video. So it's kind of hard to define it, but I would say when in doubt, definitely work on your Part 107 license. My understanding is that the test is not super hard, but there's a whole process for that. And I think I have some links at the end for you for like a study guide, and there's some cool YouTube videos you can watch and stuff like that. There's also a hobbyist carve out in the Part 107 regulations that you'll want to make yourself aware of. I haven't memorized them, but basically it's basically what they want you to do is realize that, yes, I'm flying the drone as a hobbyist, but that I also agree to adhere to all of the regulations. So, and we'll talk about some of those later. If you have a drone that weighs more than, I believe it's, I can't remember the threshold. I think it's 49 ounces, or 52 ounces. I can't remember. Basically, anything other than a Mavic Mini 2, anything heavier than that, you have to get it registered with the FAA, and I think it's like $10. And then you have to actually write the registration number on the drone itself, and you have to carry your registration number with you as well. So it's just something to be aware of. And there's tons and tons more regulations coming. One of the controversial ones that they're coming out with is relates to, and now I'm blanking on what they're calling it, but it basically, they're going to make it so that the general public can have access to know who's flying a drone where and what their GPS coordinates are. And there's going to be a lot of safety concerns about that because, there's people out there that hate drones no matter what, even if you're flying them safely and legally. So definitely a lot to pay attention to. I like the Pilot Institute's YouTube page because they talk a lot about the regulations that are coming and things like that. Any other questions before we move on? I know this part is the worst.
Just a quick comment, Matt. My name's Carl. I'm the webmaster for the club,
Yeah.
but the FAA weight limit is 250 grams. From
250 grams. There
Yeah.
you go.
I don't know what that translates to ounces though, but and I know the Mavic Mini is 249.
Yeah, it's
I
like
remember seeing
just
that in
under
some of
it.
the specs. Yeah, and then
Which-
that the ID thing wasn't that remote ID or something?
Yes,
like
remote
that?
ID. That's it. Yep.
Some kind of licensing that's coming around for. Yeah, people are getting scared about some drones, I guess.
Yeah, basically what they're going to do is they're going to require you to have basically some kind of dongle that plugs into your controller that sends out a signal so that if that's paired with your drone, so that if someone wants to figure out who's flying that drone and where they're at, they can do that. Now, it makes a ton of sense for law enforcement purposes, especially when you're talking about things like wildfires and things like that. But I think the drone community is really worried that it's going to be kind of used by people that are going to take the law into their own hands and stuff like that. So, yeah, good question. Good. Thank you for finding that.
Matt,
Yeah.
Can I ask you one other quick question before you get off this slide? What is that a picture of?
So this is called a monocline. It's a geologic formation over near Mexican Hat, Utah, which if you're on the ground, you could never really see this, but this is one of those perspectives that you could only get from an aerial perspective. So if you're familiar with Combe Ridge, that is Combe Ridge on the right, that kind of curves around to the left into the distance.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's awesome. Cool. All right, so some more tips on regulations. It's important to respect privacy of others. Don't fly your drone intentionally to spy on people. Never fly your drone near other aircraft, especially airports. And actually, depending on your drone, like on mine, if there's aircraft in the area, in the air, it will actually give you a warning on your controller, like there are aircraft in the air, so that you can be like, oh, really? Cool. I should probably land my drone now. So that's really cool. I mean, there are ways to get exceptions to the FAA, but I've literally never heard of anyone being able to successfully do that, at least not without like tons and tons of advance notice. Never fly over groups of people or public events or stadiums full of people. And the reason for that, and actually they're coming out with more regulations on this as well, is, if your drone just decides it's going to stop functioning, then you will lose control of your drone, and it then becomes basically a bullet, which can hurt people, which should kind of be obvious. But and then never ever fly your drone near public emergencies such as fires. I don't know what it is about people, but there's a wildfire and they think it's a cool idea to fly their drone to check it out with their the drone. But when the people fighting the forest fire see that there's a drone in there, they basically have to suspend all their operations because they don't want to put their pilots at risk. So never ever do that. All right, so a couple of things I wanted to point out here about national parks and wilderness areas. So I will say that the language that the National Park Service uses in regards to their regulations around, and in the Wilderness Act, the language is very confusing. Basically, their language, the way I read it, is that they don't want you to, quote unquote, operate the drone within the boundaries of a national park or a wilderness area. And when you read the way they write about it, and even on the website for the National Park Service, they're specifically saying not to take off or land in the national park, but that implies you can fly into it from outside the park. And I wanted to use this opportunity and use this photograph as kind of a cautionary tale or an unfortunate accident that I had that you can learn from. This is the first trip I took out with my drone. We went down to Marble Canyon, which is basically on the very, very northern end of the Grand Canyon National Park. And if you look at the maps, the national park boundary for the Grand Canyon only is basically where the river boundary is. So if you see this photo to the right, the national park boundary is just the river. So in my mind, I was like, well, I'm not in the national park, I should be fine. So I'm not breaking any laws. Everything's cool. Awesome. I thought I was being clever. Yeah, bro, I'm following all the rules. Well, someone pointed out to me who knows a lot more about these rules than I did at the time, because it was my first time out, that particular area also has a flight restriction on it because there are helicopter tour operators in that area, and they don't want any drone aircraft flying anywhere close to this particular area. And the way you can find out about some of these, unwritten rules is you can consult the Before You Fly application the FAA has released for your phone. And I'll show you a picture of it later. But if you can basically drop the pin on where you're at or where you want to fly from, and it'll tell you if it's legal or not. So that's good. basically what I would say is just don't do it. Don't fly in wilderness areas. You're going to disrupt other people. Most people in wilderness areas don't want to hear drones. They don't, it can be disruptive to wildlife, especially, one thing I didn't realize that there are special populations of condor in this particular area. So I should have been mindful of that as well. So it's one of those things. There's a lot of rules that they're really hard to find. So I would first check with the Before You Fly app. And I see there might be a question.
I think Carl sent a link to the
Oh, cool.
National Park Service page in the chat. That's what popped up.
Cool. Yeah, and I spent lots of time reading that and still got it wrong. So just be warned. I will say that from what I understand, the FAA really wants to use these moments as kind of teachable moments. And so as long as, if the FAA approaches you and they're like, hey, you shouldn't do that, you should just cooperate with them and maybe even ask them if you could do like a PSA about it. I mean, I wasn't approached or anything. I'm just letting you guys know. Okay.
Hey, a quick question or comment, Matt.
Yes.
Kind of along that line of operating within, flying within. So let's say someone was standing just outside the park and they flew it in. If you want to talk to people about the line of sight rule, people shouldn't think that they can just go and fly all over the whole national park.
Right. So the way that the FAA Part 107 rules are written is that you have to keep line of sight with your drone at all times, and you must keep your drone within under 400 feet of the ground. And it's not from where you took off from, it's literally from the ground underneath the drone, which if you're flying your drone in a lot of rugged terrain where the topography changes a lot, that's literally almost impossible, but those are the rules. And those are the ones that I think most drone operators struggle with the most, because there's really no way to know, if you're flying uphill or up a hill, you don't know how high up your drone is from the ground. It only tells you on your controller how high it is in relativity to you. So that can be tricky as well. Yeah. Okay, so here's a screenshot from the Before You Fly app. Just to kind of give you an example, if you wanted to try to fly your drone in Arches National Park, this is literally what the screenshot looks like for that, where I dropped my pin, and it tells you that there's restricted operations and you cannot fly a drone in that area. And if you were to click on the View Details button, it would tell you because it's in a national park. Now, I will say what kind of sucks about the Before You Fly app, in my mind, is that it doesn't give you those same warnings for wilderness areas. And I'm not sure why that is. It seems to me that the FAA is being silent about wilderness areas, but the regulations say you shouldn't fly them there. So it's basically just don't do it. But I'm just saying, don't rely on the Before You Fly app to know everything. So that's why I'm saying it can be tricky. There's been lots of examples of my friends and I where we look at our topo map and we're like, okay, we're not in wilderness. I'm not in a national park. Good to go. Before You Fly says I'm good. And then you get home and you share it and someone's like, did you know that's wilderness? And you're like, oh my gosh, no, I didn't, because it was turned into a wilderness area 6 months ago or something, and the maps don't show that. So it's really tough. So I will just say that even as someone who tries really hard to be within the rules, I still don't get it right. So it's tough. I've just been trying to tell you that. All right, so this is one that's probably more important, at least in my mind, is kind of the respect for other people and respect for wildlife. I think the FAA rules are great. There's a lot of great principles in those rules. But I think what the rules are trying to distill down into practice is a conscientious approach regarding safety and respect. So first of all, if you see that there's any other people around you, it's really important to just ask them, is it cool if I fly my drone? Are you cool with that? And if they say no, just say, okay, no problem. I'll go somewhere else. I will also say that you should never, ever fly over or near wildlife or chase wildlife with your drone. It can be incredibly disruptive to wildlife. There's actually a really interesting video of someone flying their drone chasing some bears in Alaska, and like a bunch of cubs fell down this snow fields and got separated from their mom. And yeah, it's really sad. Birds of prey like falcons and hawks and eagles will actually attack your drone, so be mindful of that. So if you know that there's birds of prey in there, you might want to think twice before flying. And there is an ethical conundrum when it comes to drones, because on one hand, they are loud and whatnot, but I will say that one thing drones have an advantage over that we as people don't, is that with a drone, you're not disrupting any of the foliage or the landscape, or damaging the area with your feet or with vandalism. So I think there's some things that could be said as advantages in terms of drones' ability to like minimize our impact. So it's not all bad in that regard. And I think there might have been a question that popped up. Okay, I'm gonna keep going.
Todd put 250 grams equals 0.55 pounds.
0.55. I was close. I knew it was 0.5 something. Cool. All right. Well, let's talk about the experience of flying. This is something that I was really, to be honest, kind of skeptical about before I got my drone. Because part of what I love about landscape and nature photography is kind of the way that it really enhances and connects you with the experience of being there and with experiencing the place and the moment in time. And I really thought that drones was going to kind of detach me from that a little bit. And I will say that it kind of does, to be honest with you. But it also reconnects you in a different way if you open yourself up to it, in terms of having that view of a different world that you could never have otherwise. So I think in that regard, it's an interesting kind of catch-22 that you kind of have to evaluate for yourself. I've talked to a lot of people like Alex Noriega, who just they don't like drones. There's something about them that for them it doesn't do it for them, and they don't like the experience of it from a photography perspective, and so they don't do it anymore. I will say that my experience, having watched my friend Kane use his drone on a iPad versus me using my drone on an iPhone, there's an incredible difference in the level of immersion you have in terms of flying around and seeing the landscape. So I will say the larger the screen you have, the more immersive your experience is going to be. But your mileage may vary. You might be totally fine just using your phone like I have been. But I'm excited to try out an iPad at some point. After you're comfortable operating the drone and understanding how it works, and pushing this way does that, pushing this way does this, I think it's really important to kind of, there's a tendency for us to obsess about like watching the drone in the air, but then you're not looking at what the drone sees on your screen. And that, for me, that was the thing that took the longest to get over. So what really helped for me was to kind of pretend that the screen is actually my eyes. So I pretended like the drone is literally me, and that I'm able to move around and look around and watch for things that I might run into. And that really helped me in terms of feeling more comfortable with safety, and also being more open to different compositions, and also just having a general orientation of where the heck my drone was actually at. I mean, it's really easy if you're looking at the drone and you're looking back down at your screen. It's really easy to like, your brain it's hard for your brain to adapt to those two things. So I found it's really important to maintain most of your focus on the screen itself, but use the screen to constantly be aware of where you're at. So I found that to be really useful for myself. Any questions about that? Because I think that's the thing that I personally struggled with the most getting into flying a drone.
Matt, may I ask,
Yeah.
Do you at all times see the exactly same thing as the lens of the camera on the drone?
Yeah, so I will say that at least my drone, the experience is relatively similar to like a mirrorless camera. So, it's basically an electronic viewfinder. Yeah, so it's very similar. Um, I will say it's, the sensors aren't as good as like a higher end DSLR. So, highlights and shadows aren't going to be quite as good. But yeah, it's for the most part, you're kind of what you see is what you get.
Thank you.
Yep. And then my drone, I think the field of view is 24 millimeters and it's a 16, no, it's a 4:3 aspect ratio. So I think the Mavic 2 Pro is a 2:3 ratio. All right, so this is a picture of the controller that comes with the Mavic Air 2. So you can see that this little plug plugs into your cell phone, and then you use the DJI app to kind of connect it to your drone, and then you use the controller and your screen to control everything that the drone does, from not only from the camera settings, but also flying it around and also switching between video and still. And I got used to it actually really fast, but I also came from like a video game background. So it might take you less time than me. It might take you more time than me to get used to it. And I'm still learning tricks every day on what it is capable of. Here's an example of the Mavic 2 Pro smart controller connected to an iPad. So you can see the difference between the screen size, and you can imagine the experience of seeing the world through an iPad versus seeing it through your phone would be vastly different. But you can see that the setup involved is a little bit more involved as well. The cool thing about the Air 2 is, you plug it in, you turn it on, and you're in the air within like 45 seconds. So it's really quick turnaround time. So that's what I like about the Air 2. It's quick. So like I said, it's like a video game. Practice makes perfect. We talked a little bit earlier about the 3 different modes. There's the tripod mode, which is a really great way to practice. Basically, it slows the drone down to a lot lower speeds. It's a lot more forgiving with the controller and the sticks. So it's a good way to get used to how to fly the drone around. And then, once you're comfortable with that, you can switch it to normal and see how it responds to different amounts of pressure, or how far you push the controller in one direction or another. It's really important to understand, like, you can use both sticks at the same time. So, one controls looking left and right, and one controls moving forward and backwards and sideways. So one controls movement and one controls view. So it's important to keep that in mind. That can be confusing, but you can also set it up different ways. I think mine's the standard configuration. I like it. Collision avoidance, good thing to keep in mind. One thing you'll grow to either love or hate about these drones is that when you get within a certain amount of distance from an object, it will start beeping at you. And most of the time, you're going to be like, yeah, I know, I'm trying to get really close to that rock so I can take a picture of it. But you'll be thankful that it does that when you didn't remember that that rock is there when you're flying backwards. So what I will say is, if you're not sure where your drone's at, swivel it around, look around with the camera, see what's going on around you. That's really the best, safest way to make sure you don't crash it into something. As far as the camera goes, I personally found it really similar to using a DSLR. It's got exposure settings, it has shutter speed, it has a histogram, which is really nice. You can see your shadows and your highlights. You can actually, adjust your ISO. You can switch from manual to automatic. I will say automatic actually does a pretty darn good job for a lot of pictures, interestingly enough. And it even has like burst modes, it has exposure bracketing modes that you can do. So it's basically like a DSLR, except for all the controls are right here and on your screen. So I say the best advice I'll give you is have someone who's flown a drone before kind of show you the ropes, and they'll show you a lot of things that you maybe aren't going to pick up. I was actually surprised the manual wasn't all that helpful. The videos aren't that helpful, but the Pilot Institute videos were super helpful. He is very thorough. And I think he uses it as a kind of a way of pitching his Part 107 license classes that are paid classes, but they're really great videos. And I'm going to stop there and see if there's any questions about any of this.
Matt, can you buy insurance for your drone?
Oh man, awesome question. So I'm not sure how all the manufacturers do that, but DJI has called a program called Care Refresh. And so for like the drone that I have, it was $75 for 1 year. So if I crash my drone for whatever reason, as long as you're able to recover the drone, and you can send it in and they'll send you a brand new drone. So yes, the more expensive your drone, the more expensive the Care Refresh is. But the caveat is that you have to be able to recover it. So yeah, good question. And I always keep that in mind. I'm like, I'm not going to fly my drone somewhere I can't get it. So yeah, cool. Okay. And I think, Dan, you're unmuted. Okay, let's talk about battery management. So this is, if you do drone photography similar to the way I do it, you're probably gonna be out in the field for a while. So, I like to do my photography trips for, several days at a time. And, 30 minutes of drone battery is about, 60 watt hours of power. So on the little Air 2 batteries and the Mavic Air Pro 2s, it's even more. So battery management becomes an incredibly critical part of the way you think about staying ready and being able to fly multiple times on a trip. So if you assume that one battery is about 30 minutes, you're going to want to time your flights accordingly. I think we talked about that a lot earlier. One interesting thing is that the batteries are pre-programmed to kind of lose charge after a few days. I think that's to prevent them from burning or starting a fire. And I will say, like, if you go camping a lot, something like that, or maybe you're flying your drone in the winter, it's important to keep them warm so that when you put them into the drone, they're still at full capacity. So I like to, keep them in my pockets, like in a coat, or like when I go on my trips in my rooftop tent and stuff, I actually like to put them in a bag and then sleep with that bag under my sleeping bag or in my sleeping bag with me. Or another trick is you can put them in a bag or something and put them on your heater in your car in the morning. It's just important to keep them warm before you go out to fly. I love to recharge my batteries in the field with solar power, and I have a whole setup for how that works. I use a Jackery 240 and also a Blue Yeti EB 240, which has 2,400 watt hours of power in it. So I can basically recharge my drone batteries for I don't know, 100 flights before it goes out. So, but that's a pretty big investment. But solar power can keep you topped off for many days at a time. Any questions on that before we move on? Because that's a whole other niche conversation. And I do have a YouTube video about that as well, somewhere on my YouTube channel. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the creative possibilities that are available to you with a drone. I think probably most of us who have purchased a camera within the last 4 or 5 years, you probably have some form of 4K video on your DSLR or your mirrorless camera. Well, imagine having 4K video on a flying camera that can go anywhere. It really expands your vision in terms of what you can do with that. I'll show you a video here in a minute of something I did that was pretty fun. I will say using ND filters can become incredibly useful if you're doing a lot of video, because if you're doing video during the day and if you're shooting at if you're doing cinematic, that's 1/24 of it's 24p. So you're going to want a shutter speed of 1/50th or 1/60th before you get flickering. So if you want to manage that, you're going to have to put like a 6-stop ND filter on there to get the light cut down enough to where your shutter speed is accurate for video. So it takes a lot of trial and error to get the video right for proper exposure. But it's important to kind of think about how ND filters can affect and enhance your video. My drone and most of the latest drones have some really cool creative video modes embedded into them. They're really easy to use, actually. For example, you can set your drone to target something and follow it. So like, for example, if you wanted to, do a video of a car driving through a cool Rocky Mountain road, you could fly your drone up, you on your controller, you highlight the car. It's like, okay, I'm targeting the car. And then you do the follow thing and it will just follow the car around. So it's a really cool feature. It can also do like circle mode where it like does a 360-degree circle around you, keeping the camera focused on a target. There's lots of really cool video modes that these drones can do. It's honestly, I haven't even tapped into all of them myself. One cool thing drones enable you to do is a lot of really cool vlogging. I'm sure if anyone watches like Thomas Heaton's videos, he does a lot of drone video, like with the follow modes and stuff like that. So you can do some cool stuff with drones and video. Here's a video I did this last summer. I just wanted to show you. This was the circle mode. This is from the top of a 13,000-foot mountain. So I climbed the mountain with my drone and all my camera gear. You can actually make out my tripod and my camera there, but just wanted to show you this little video I did with the drone. You can just see kind of how cool it is, just to show you the perspective of where I was at with the drone. This is the kind of stuff that having a drone with you will enable you to do. It's pretty incredible to be. I mean, gosh, talk about the storytelling opportunities, and you can show your friends the cool places you go to or whatever. I mean, you can just show people cool campsites, or really the possibilities are endless. So it's a pretty neat little function that these drones have. So that's that. Cool, man. I think that's the last slide. So just before we open it up to Q&A, I just wanted to do a couple of quick plugs. You can check out my photography on my website at mattpaynephotography.com. I think earlier I saw someone posted a link to my podcast in there. I basically do casual conversations with photographers all over the world on various topics relating to photography, whether that be, I've done some on drones, we've done some on mental health, we've done some on, running your business, to marketing, to creative approaches, to pretty much anything you could think of. We've done panel discussions on diversity and women in photography. Really, the list goes on and on. It's been a fun project. I am available for one-on-one workshops and experiences, and you can always reach out to me on my website or through email at matt@mattpaynephotography.com. So with that being said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Hey, Matt.
And see what questions we have.
Hey, Matt, this is Sean.
Yeah.
Before we open it up to questions on this, do you want to get a plug in for your new landscape competition?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Thanks for that. So yeah, just real quick, me and 3 other landscape photographers, including Tim Parkin, who runs On Landscape magazine in the United Kingdom. We've partnered to create a new landscape and nature photography competition called Natural Landscape Photography Awards. Basically, kind of what came out of some frustrations we had about the types of photography that's been historically over the last 5 or 6 years winning competitions. They've been heavily manipulated and digitally altered, and we just wanted to create a competition that kind of creates some standards and some rules around digital manipulation and editing so that the playing field is more level. And we have several categories, including aerial, abstract, intimate landscapes, grand scenic landscapes, and night photography. And we also have a project submission. And we're going to have some early bird rates. So sign up to our mailing list if you want to get those. And entries open on June 1st. And we have an incredible panel of judges, including Alex Noriega, Alistair Ben, Joe Cornish, Sarah Marino, Sandra Bartoka, Stephen Forrester, lots of Adam Gibbs. So yes, we're really excited to launch this competition. It's our first year. And we hope to also publish a super high quality fine art book with all the winning images that would hopefully go to free to anyone who enters at a certain level. So really excited for it. So yeah, check it out, naturallandscapeawards.com.
Thank you. I just wanted to remember to have you talk about that.
Thanks, man.
Sure. So now I'll shut up and let others ask questions.
Now, hopefully I didn't go too fast.
No.
Cool.
I think it was, to me personally, it was a very cool, excellent presentation and subject matter that, as I said at the top, it's kind of growing within the industry. And so with it being on the growth curve or the leading edge, thought it'd be great to have you come on and talk about your experience and some of the things people should consider if there are others in the group that don't already have a drone and maybe are thinking of this as a way to, look at something different if they've been tired of looking at it from the ground level for so long.
I mean, I will say, I still do a lot of ground photography. Obviously I love hiking in wilderness areas and stuff, so I don't even bring my drone with me on those trips. But yeah, whenever I can, and those conditions are good for it and the location avails itself, definitely get the drone out more and more.
Hey, Matt, I've got a question. This is Larry. Can you hear me?
I sure can.
About insurance, you mentioned about replacement cost insurance. Do you have liability insurance also?
Good question. So I do personally, through my business for my photography. So yeah, I would encourage you to get that. I know, most of the places that I'm flying, there's not going to be any liability issues because I have zero interest in flying my drone in a city or around buildings or around people. Where I'm flying my drone is way out in BLM land where there's no people, no one's around. And if the highest risk I have is crashing my drone into something. So, but yeah, it's a good question.
So you don't know offhand if a homeowner's insurance would cover something like that?
I would guess it probably wouldn't cover the liability. I mean, it might cover the cost to replace your drone. But yeah, if you need actual, liability insurance to cover any damages you caused to something else.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. It's a good question.
Matt?
Yeah.
I have one other quick question. Have you ever taken it on the plane, and is there any issues with the batteries taking them on a plane?
So I have not, because I just got my drone in July of last year and I haven't flown in a plane since then for obvious reasons. But my understanding is that people take drones on airplanes all the time for travel. I think it probably just depends on the airline and how you pack them. But yeah, I know people bring them people fly to Iceland all the time. And
yeah, I think I was listening to Nick Page and he was talking about taking his to Iceland. And I think it's, you just can't check it with the lithium batteries. So you probably have to have them with you.
Right.
Again, I'm no expert on it, but I know he's taking his out there.
I think that's right. You just have to bring them as your carry-on.
Yeah, this is Oz. As far as I know, you can't take your camera batteries with the checked luggage. You have to hand carry it.
Right. I mean, I don't know about you, but I do that anyway. Like, I don't want any of my camera gear checked.
Yeah, I do the same.
Yeah, good question.
This is Carl. I want to make two comments. One, the video that you showed at the end, at least on my screen, maybe other people saw it this way too. It was really choppy looking, and that's just zoom. That's, obviously a drone does not produce, a 4 frame per second video. It's up to the full 24, 25, 30, or whatever the capabilities of the drone are. And also photography wise, the drones that you've been talking about this evening, the Mavics, the Mini has a smaller sensor, but I'm pretty sure the Air and the Pro are both 1-inch sensors and they shoot raw files, correct?
Yep. Yeah, it's full raw files. And they're incredibly malleable. The Pro 2 files are a lot better than the Air 2, but honestly, I have not been that upset by them. I mean, they get the job done pretty good for anything I would want to do. I mean, I have a photo I shot this fall that was actually a drone panorama before sunrise, so it was pretty low light, and I printed it 36 inches wide, and it was super clean. So, yeah.
This is ours again. How many megapixels?
So it's kind of deceiving, right? So on the Air 2, it's a native 12 megapixel. So it's kind of like a Sony A7S. But it has a 48 megapixel mode that has more pixels. I've used both, and I will say the native mode is better in low light. And the 48 megapixel mode is good if it's, pretty even light. But if you have any concerns about that, it's good to just create some panoramas you can stitch and get more pixels. But yeah, it's a good question.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hey, Matt, it's Cliff. Just curious if you have any issues with sun glare on the screen. You're using your iPhone for a display, and I mean, I have enough trouble looking at my phone outside. I just wonder what's that like, when you're trying to control a drone with it.
It's funny. I have a picture of my friend Kane, who you guys had here. We were in the desert this last summer, and he's like under his jacket, almost like an old 4x5 shooter with the sheet and the bellows. It is a problem. So you probably want to find a way to get into some shade or to be able to cover yourself. But yeah, that can be an issue.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. I'm surprised no one had any questions about the solar setup.
Yeah, I've seen your YouTube blurb on it. It's pretty cool.
That's fun.
So how many watts does your peak output on your solar panels?
So I have two panels. One's like just a little 60 watt Rock Pals panel, and then I have a 120 watt Overland solar bug out panel. But I use that for all kinds of purposes. My Forerunner has a second battery that powers a refrigerator, so I use that to top off my second battery, and it's a whole other. But it's good for the Jackery too, and the Blue Eddy. But
yeah, thanks.
Quick question came to mind. So when you did the video on top of the 13K peak, with the air being so thin, did it have to thrust that much harder and eat up battery faster to get lift?
I didn't notice that. I didn't have any issues at all. Mm-mm.
Okay.
No, in fact, I flew a pretty long video of it actually, and had zero issues. Yeah. I flew it along this ridge. It was beautiful. I was like, I've seen this from the ground, but I was like busy climbing it. Yeah.
This is ours again. How far away can you fly without losing control?
What do you mean control?
When do you lose contact with the drone? How far away?
So I will say this, you can fly them up to like 2 miles, but you have to keep line of sight by law.
That's a long way.
I'll just say that.
And is that unaided line of sight? Can't use a telescope.
I'm actually not sure about that. I think it has to be unaided. Yeah.
I believe it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I know some people in the mapping industry are trying to get away, like they'll daisy chain, a watcher and operators. And so it'll get out to end of line of sight for the first guy, and the second guy will pick it up. So
Right.
people who are in the mapping industry are like flying a corridor of power lines, and so they can be more efficient. They'll just daisy chain it along.
Yeah, I will say, I think the OcuSync 3.0 that Mavic's coming out with, I heard it's rated up to like 3 miles. I mean, it's
That's quite a
pretty,
range.
it's
Yeah.
pretty crazy. I mean, you're gonna lose sight of it well before you lose the. Yeah, I'll just say that.
Especially if you have your jacket over your head trying to keep the sun on the screen.
Yeah, I mean the issue with losing control of it, I think to your question is the best way to manage it is to make sure there's no obstacles between you and the drone. So if there's trees or like a cliff face or anything like that, that's gonna degrade the signal. It basically is a high-powered Wi-Fi signal, and so it'll, if you go around a corner or something like that, you'll lose signal real quick. But you also lost line of sight. So
how do you keep your phone charged?
oh, so it's actually, I mean, I keep my phone pretty much fully charged all the time anyway, but it's really cool. The Mavic Air 2 controller, the battery on that's actually pretty impressive. I can't remember how many amp hours it has, but you can actually, there's a setting where it will charge your phone while it's plugged in. So it's really not a problem.
Yeah, I read a piece that said the next war is going to be won by the army with the most batteries.
I mean, it's probably true. And to be honest with you, China's going to win.
Unless we learn, we might learn. You never know.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, most of the batteries are being manufactured in China.
Yeah.
So you're flying all in manual mode, or can that level of drone that you have do pre-flight plans before you take off? So if you
it cannot. So that would be, I think the Mavic 2 Pro can do. There's I can't remember the name of the function, but you can create a pre-flight plan where you can but you have to fly it first. So but then you can say, okay, I want to fly this video, but here's the flight plan, but you have to literally fly it first. I think that's for the hyperlapse.
Okay.
Function.
So it doesn't.
I've never used it because I've never had the forethought to do it.
Okay.
Yeah, because my brain just doesn't work that way. That would be one of the functions I wish it had is GPS storage. So if I said I want to remember where this GPS coordinate is and elevation of this spot because my battery's running low, and I want to bring it home and then put a new battery in and fly it exactly back to that exact spot, but it doesn't have that. That would be the best feature ever. Because that's a problem I have quite often. Because the light's changing, and maybe you didn't time the sunset quite right, and you're like, "Oh man, I have 5 minutes. Go, 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 go!" And you're in a panic. And
you need to find the right support person to see if their log file stores it and how you download it and read that log file.
Yeah, they do have that, but I don't think you can plug it into the drone to send it there.
Yeah,
that would be really cool though. I was going to say one thing that's really neat about these things. Let's say your drone's 1,000, 1,500 feet out, 200 feet in the air, and you're not exactly sure which direction it has to come to get back to you. All you have to do is double tap the home button and it just flies right back to you. I mean, it's pretty impressive stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it's you get used to it and you're like, okay, come home. When you first fly there, you're like, where's my drone? Oh no, I'm gonna lose my drone.
This is Oz again. On your pictures, typically what elevation above the ground were you?
Yeah, so some of the examples I showed you were on purpose, were not legal. So that was that example I gave you of the Grand Canyon one, because I didn't know that was a rule when I went out the first time. But typically I'm around 300 to 400 feet. Yeah. And I will say, like I said, it's hard to know what the elevation is between the drone and the ground because it doesn't tell you that. it only tells you the elevation distance between where the drone is and where you're at. So you have to kind of know, you have to read the map, you know. It's tough, especially if you're in like the mountains like me.
Just curious, is anybody in the club? Is anybody at Focus already gotten into this or getting there or getting ready to head that direction?
If not,
I have one my wife bought me for a present several years ago. It's still in the box.
now it's time, Lucius.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe after tonight it'll see the light of day.
Yes.
Better charge that battery.
Yeah, I highly recommend those Pilot Institute videos, especially if they have one specific to your drone, because he really does drill into kind of the details of what you need to know for safe operation and what your drone can and can't do, and it's really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I put their URL in the chat during the conversation we were having. But Matt, quick question for you. One of the things I saw in one of Thomas Heaton's videos is he took his drone up above the tree line and flew like to the other side of a ridge to go check out another area to see if he wanted to walk over there and photograph. Have you ever done something like that?
Oh yeah, man. The Air 2 is awesome. Scout drone for sure. Yeah, because you can see the drone, but maybe you can't see over that hill. So yeah, using it to scout different places or maybe different compositions or things like that, it's super helpful for that. Yep. I would say keep in mind the UK has different rules too, though. So I would say the United States rules are probably the most heavily regulated.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's because there's a lot of people out there doing really stupid stuff. You know, when I'm flying my drone, I'm literally in the middle of nowhere. You know, there's no airports, no buildings, but people are doing stuff in cities and crashing them into people's houses and crashing them into helicopters and stuff. I mean, that's why a lot of these regulations exist, is because they're needed.
Yeah, no, there was on the Denver photography page on Facebook, a guy had posted a photo of downtown Denver, and
Oh yeah, I saw that one.
I said, hey, that's really cool, but it's against the law. And so he kind of messaged me privately, and we talked back and forth. And he was appreciative. He said, "Thank you. I'm new to it, and I didn't know all this." But then you had others in the comment thread like, "Be quiet, Karen," and like, dude, you don't want to crash this and injure someone. And
yeah, it's a big problem in cities, especially San Francisco, because like the Golden Gate Bridge, for example, is off limits. But you constantly see people with drone footage from there. It's like,
yeah.
And then you call them out. They're like, whatever, man.
Yeah, that's the problem. Too many people just don't care.
Yeah. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, some of the rules are kind of ridiculous when it comes to being in the middle of nowhere. But, the FAA doesn't, they can't make separate rules for different places, and it's too complicated.
Cool. If there are no other questions, wrap it up, let you all get back to your evening. It's almost bedtime here on the East Coast. So, Matt, I thank you for agreeing to come on and talk about this. I thought it was really cool, interesting, different topic matter. So thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me.
Matt. Very good. Yeah.
And
many thanks.
someone down in Durango, I'll look up, buy you a beer.
Awesome. Appreciate
Thanks,
that.
Matt.
Sean knows the way to my heart.
Beer and lightweight camera gear.
You got it.
All right. Thanks a lot. Everyone have a good evening.
All right. Cheers, man.
All right.
Thanks,
Take
Sean.
care.
Thank you very much, Matt. That was awesome.